The Night Circus, a novel by Erin Morgenstern. Anticipation. The circus arrives without warning. No announcement precedes it. No paper notices on downtown posts and billboards. No mentions or advertisements in local newspapers. It's simply there when yesterday it was not. The towering tents are striped in white and black. No golds and crimsons to be seen. No color at all, save for the neighboring trees and the grass of the surrounding fields. Black and white stripes on gray sky. Countless tents of varying shapes and sizes with an elaborate wrought iron fence encasing them in a colorless world. Even what little ground is visible from the outside is black and white, painted or powdered, or treated with some other circus trick. But it's not open for business. Not just yet. Within hours, everyone in town has heard about it. By afternoon, the news has spread several towns over. Word of mouth is a more effective method of advertisement than the typed words and the exclamation points on paper pamphlets or posters. It is impressive and unusual news, the sudden appearance of a mysterious circus. People marvel at the staggering height of the tallest tents. They stare at the clock that sits just inside the gates that no one can properly describe, and the black sign painted in white letters that hangs upon the gates, the one that reads, "Open at nightfall, closes at dawn." What kind of circus only opens at night, people ask. No one has a proper answer, yet as dusk approaches, there is a substantial crowd of spectators gathering outside the gates. You are amongst them, of course. Your curiosity got the better of you, as curiosity is wont to do. You stand in the fading light, the scarf around your neck pulled up against the chilly evening breeze, waiting to see for yourself exactly what kind of circus only opens once the sun sets. The ticket booth clearly visible behind the gates is closed and barred. The tents are still, save for when they ripple ever so slightly in the wind. The only movement within the circus is the clock that ticks by the passing minutes, if such a wonder of sculpture can even be called a clock. The circus looks abandoned and empty, but you think perhaps you can smell caramel wafting through the evening breeze beneath the crisp scent of autumn leaves. A subtle sweetness in the edges of the cold. The sun disappears completely beyond the horizon, and the remaining luminosity shifts from dusk to twilight. The people around you are growing restless from waiting, a sea of shuffling feet, murmuring about abandoning the endeavor in search of someplace warmer to pass the evening. You yourself are debating departing when it happens. First, there's a popping sound. It's barely audible over the wind and conversation. A soft noise like a kettle about to boil for tea. Then comes the light. All over the tents, small lights begin to flicker as though the entirety of the circus is covered in particularly bright fireflies. The waiting crowd quiets as it watches this display of illumination. Someone near you gasps. A small child claps his hands with glee at the sight. When the tents are all aglow, sparkling against the night sky, the sign appears, stretched across the top of the gates, hidden in curls of wrought iron. More firefly-like lights flicker to life. They pop as they brighten, some accompanied by a shower of glowing white sparks and a bit of smoke. The people nearest to the gates take a few steps back. At first it's only a random pattern of lights, but as more of them ignite it becomes clear that they are aligned in scripted letters. First a C is distinguishable, followed by more letters, a Q oddly, and several E's. When the final bulb pops alight, and the smoke and the sparks dissipate, it's finally legible, the elaborate incandescent sign. Leaning to your left to gain a better view, you can see that it reads, "The Circus de Rives." Some of the crowd smile knowingly, while others frown and look questioningly at their neighbors. A child near you tugs on her mother's sleeve, begging to know what it says. "The Circus of Dreams," comes the reply. The girl smiles, delighted. When the wrought iron gate shudders and unlocks, seemingly by their own validation, they swing outwards, inviting the crowd inside. Now the circus is open. Now you may enter. Unexpected Post, New York, February 1873. The man billed as Prospero the Enchanter receives a fair amount of correspondence via the theater office, but this is the first envelope addressed to him that contains a suicide note, and it is also the first to arrive carefully pinned to the coat of a 5-year-old girl. The lawyer who escorted her to the theater refuses to explain despite the manager's protestations, abandoning her as quickly as he can, with no more than a shrug and the tip of a hat. The theater manager does not need to read the envelope to know who the girl is for. The bright eyes peering out from under a cloud of unruly brown curls are smaller, whiter versions of the magician's own. He takes her by the hand, her small fingers hanging limply within his. She refuses to remove her coat despite the warmth of the theater, giving only an adamant shake of her head when he asks her why. The manager takes the girl to his office, not knowing what else to do with her. She sits quietly on an uncomfortable chair beneath a line of framed posters advertising past productions, surrounded by boxes of tickets and receipts. The manager brings her a cup of tea with an extra lump of sugar, but it remains on the desk untouched and grows cold. The girl does not move, does not fidget in her seat. She stays perfectly still with her hands folded in her lap. Her gaze is fixed downward, focused on her boots that do not quite touch the floor. There's a small scuff on one toe, but the laces are knotted in perfect bows. The sealed envelope hangs from the second topmost button of her coat until Prospero arrives. She hears him before the door opens, his footsteps heavy and echoing in the hall, unlike the measured pace of the manager, who has come and gone several times, quiet as a cat. "There's also a package for you, sir," the manager says, as he opens the door, ushering the magician into the cramped office before slipping off to attend to other theater matters, having no desire to witness what might become of this encounter. The magician scans the office, a stack of letters in one hand, a black velvet cape lined with shockingly white silk cascading behind him, expecting a paper-wrapped box or crate. Only when the girl looks up at him with his own eyes does he realize what the theater manager was referring to. Prospero the Enchanter's immediate reaction upon meeting his daughter is a simple declaration of, "Well, fuck." The girl returns her attention to her boots. The magician closes the door behind him, dropping the stack of letters on the desk next to the teacup as he looks at the girl. He rips the envelope from her coat, leaving the pen clinging steadfastly to the button. While the writing on the front bears his stage name and the theater address, the letter inside greets him with his given name, Hector Bowen. He skims over the contents, any emotional impact desired by the author, failing miserably, and finally, he pauses at the only fact he deems relevant, that this girl is now left in his custody, is obviously his own daughter, and that her name is Celia. "She should have named you Miranda," the man called Prospero the Enchanter says to the girl with a chuckle. "I suppose she was not clever enough to think of it." The girl looks up at him again, dark eyes narrow beneath her curls. The teacup on the desk begins to shake. Ripples disrupt the calm surface as the cracks tremble across the glaze. Then it collapses in shards of floured porcelain. Cold tea pools in the saucer and drips over onto the floor. leaving sticky trails along the polished wood. The magician's smile vanishes. He glances back at the desk with a frown. The spilled tea begins to seep back from the floor. The cracked and broken pieces stand and reform themselves around the liquid until the cup sits complete once more, soft swirls of steam rising into the air. The girl stares at the teacup, her eyes wide. Hector Bowen takes his daughter's face in his gloved hand, scrutinizing her expression for a moment before releasing her, his fingers leaving long red marks across her cheeks. "You might be interesting," he says. The girl does not reply. He makes several attempts to rename her in the following weeks, but she refuses to respond to anything but Celia. Several months later, once he's decided she is ready, the magician writes a letter of his own. He includes no address, but it reaches its destination across the ocean, nonetheless. A Gentleman's Wager, London, October 1873. Tonight is the final performance of a very limited engagement. Prospero the Enchanter has not graced the London stage in some time, and the booking is for a single week of performances with no matinees. Tickets, though exorbitantly priced, sold out quite quickly. The theater is so packed, many of the women kept their fans at hand to flutter against their negligee, warding off the heavy heat that permeates the air despite the autumnal chill outside. At one point in the evening, each of those fans suddenly becomes a small bird, until a flock of them loop the theater to uproarious applause. When each bird returns falling into neatly folded fans on their respective owners' laps, the applause only grows, though some are too stunned to clap, turning their fans of feathers and lace over in their hands in wonder, no longer at all concerned about the heat. The man in the gray suit sitting in the stage left box does not applaud, not for this, nor for a single trick throughout the evening. He watches the man upon the stage with a steady, scrutinizing gaze that never wavers through the entire duration of the performance. Not once does he raise his gloved hands to clap. He does not even lift a brow at feats that elicit applause and gasps, or the occasional shriek of surprise from the rest of the rapt audience. After the performance has concluded, the man in the gray suit navigates the crush of patrons to the theater lobby with ease. He slips through the curtained door leading to the backstage dressing room unnoticed. Stage hands and dressers never so much as glance at him. He raps on the door at the end of the hall with the silver tip of his cane. The door swings open of its own accord, revealing a cluttered dressing room lined with mirrors, each reflecting a different view of Prospero. His tailcoat has been tossed lazily over a velvet armchair, and his waistcoat hangs unbuttoned over his lace-edged shirt. The top hat, which featured predominantly in his performance, sits on a hat stand nearby. The man appeared younger on the stage, his age buried under the glare of the footlights and layers of makeup. The face in the mirrors is lined, the hair significantly graying, but there is something youthful in the grin that appears as he catches the sight of the man standing in the doorway. "You hated it, didn't you?" he asks without turning away from the mirror, addressing the ghastly gray reflection. He wipes the thick residue of powder from his face with a handkerchief that might once have been white. "It is a pleasure to see you too, Hector," the man in the gray suit says, closing the door quietly behind him. "You despised every minute, I can tell," Hector Bowen says with a laugh. "I was watching you. Don't try to deny it." He turns and extends a hand. The man in the gray suit does not accept. In response, Hector shrugs and waves his fingers dramatically in the direction of the opposite wall. The velvet armchair slides forward from the corner, packed with trunks and scarves, while the tailcoat floats up from it like a shadow, obediently hanging itself in a wardrobe. "Sit, please," Hector says. "It's not as comfortable as the ones upstairs, I'm afraid. I cannot say I approve of such exhibitions," the man in the gray suit says, taking off his gloves and dusting the chair with them before he sits, passing off manipulations as tricks and illusions, charging admissions. Hector tosses the powder-covered handkerchief onto a table littered with brushes and tins of grease paint. Not a single person in that audience believes for a second that what I do up there is real, he says, gesturing in the general direction of the stage. That's the beauty of it. Have you seen the contraption these magicians build to accomplish the most mundane feats? They are a bunch of fish covered in feathers trying to convince the public that they can fly. I am simply a bird in their midst. The audience cannot tell the difference beyond knowing that I am better at it. That does not make it any less frivolous an endeavor. These people line up to be mystified, Hector says. I can mystify them easier than most. It seems a waste to let the opportunity pass by. Pays better than you might think as well. Can I get you a drink? There are bottles hidden around here somewhere, though I'm not entirely sure they're glasses. He attempts to sort through the contents of a table, pushing aside piles of newspaper and birdless bird cages. No, thank you, the man in the gray suit says, shifting in his chair and resting his hands on the handle of his cane. I found your performance curious, the reactions of your audience somewhat perplexing. You were lacking in precision. It can't be too good if I want them to believe I'm as fake as the rest of them, Hector says with a laugh. I thank you for coming and suffering through my show. I'm surprised you even turned up. I was beginning to give up hope. I've had that box reserved for you the entire week. I do not often decline invitations. Your letter said you had a proposition for me. I do indeed, Hector says, striking his hands together in a single sharp clap. I was hoping you might be up for a game. It's been far too long since we've played. Though first you must meet my new project. I was under the impression that you had given up on teaching. I had, but this is a singular opportunity I could not resist. Hector walks over to the door, mostly hidden by a long, standing mirror. Celia, dearest, he calls into the adjoining room before returning to his chair. A moment later, a small girl appears in the doorway, dressed too nicely for the chaotic shabbiness of the surroundings, all ribbons and lace, perfect as a shop-fresh doll, saved for a few unruly curls escaping her braids. She hesitates, hovering on the threshold when she sees that her father is not alone. It's all right, dearest. Come in, Hector says, beckoning her forward with a wave of his hand. This is an associate of mine. No need to be shy. She takes a few steps closer and executes a perfect curtsy, the lace-trimmed hem of her dress sweeping over the worn floorboards. This is my daughter, Celia, Hector says to the man in the gray suit, placing his hands on the girl's head. Celia, this is Alexander. Pleased to meet you, she says. Her voice is barely more than a whisper, and pitched lower than might be expected for a girl her size. The man in the gray suit gives her a polite nod. I would like you to show the gentleman what you can do, Hector says. He pulls a silver pocket watch on a long chain from his waistcoat and puts it on the table. Go ahead. The girl's eyes widen. You said I was not to do that in front of anyone, she says. You made me promise. This gentleman's not just anyone, Hector replies with a laugh. You said no exceptions, Celia protests. Her father's smile fades. He takes her by the shoulders and looks her sternly in the eye. This is a very special case, he says. Please show this man what you can do, just like in your lessons. He pushes her towards the table with the watch. The girl nods gravely and shifts her attention to the watch, her hands clasped behind her back. After a moment, the watch begins to rotate slowly, turning in circles on the surface of the table, trailing its chain behind in a spiral, and the watch lifts from the table, floating into the air and hovering as though it was suspended in water. Hector looks to the man in the gray suit for a reaction. Impressive, the man says, but quite basic. Clara's brows furrow over her dark eyes and the watch shatters, gears spilling out into the air. Celia, her father says. She blushes at the sharpness of his tone and mumbles an apology. The gears float back to the watch, settling into place until the watch is complete again, hands ticking the seconds forward as though nothing had happened. Now that is a bit more impressive, the man in the gray suit admits, but she has a temper. She's young, Hector says, patting the top of Celia's head and ignoring her frown. This is with not even a year of study. By the time she's grown, she'll be incomparable. I could take any child off the street and teach them as much. Incomparable is a matter of your personal opinion, and easily disproved. Huh, Hector exclaims. Then you're willing to play? The man in the gray suit hesitates only a moment before he nods. Something a bit more complex than last time, and yes, I may be interested, he says. Possibly. Of course it will be more complex, Hector says. I have a natural talent to play with. I'm not wagering that for something simple. Natural talent is a questionable phenomenon. Inclination perhaps, but innate ability is extremely rare. She's my own child, of course she has innate ability. You admit she had lessons, the man in the gray suit says. How can you be certain? Celia, when did you start your lessons? Hector asks, without looking at her. March, she answers. What year, dearest? Hector adds. This year, she says, as though it's a particularly stupid question. 8 months of lessons, Hector clarifies, at barely 6 years of age. If I recall correctly, you sometimes start your own students a bit younger than that. Celia is clearly more advanced than she would be if she did not have natural ability. She could levitate that watch on her first try. The man in the gray suit turns his attention to Celia. You broke that by accident, did you not? He asks, nodding at the watch sitting at the table. Celia frowns and gives him the tiniest of nods. She has remarkable control for one so young, he remarks to Hector, but such a temper is always an unfortunate variable. It can lead to impulsive behavior. She'll either grow out of it or learn to control it. It's a minor issue. The man in the gray suit keeps his eyes on the girl, but addresses Hector when he speaks. To Celia's ears, the sounds no longer resolve into words, and she frowns as her father's response take on the same muddled quality. You would wager your own child. She won't lose, Hector says. I suggest you find a student you can tolerate parting with, if you do not already have one to spare. I assume her mother has no opinion on the matter. You would assume correctly. The man in the gray suit considers the girl for some time before he speaks again, and still she does not comprehend the words. I understand your confidence in her ability, though I encourage you to at least consider the possibility that she could be lost, should the competition not play out in her favor. I will find a player to truly challenge her, otherwise there is no reason for me to agree to participate. Her victory cannot be guaranteed. That is a risk I'm willing to take, Hector says, without even glancing at his daughter. If you would like to make it official here and now, go right ahead. The man in the gray suit looks back at Celia, and when he speaks, she understands the words once more. Very well, he says with a nod. He made me not hear right, Celia whispers when her father turns to her. I know, dearest. That wasn't very polite, Hector says as he guides her closer to the chair where the man scrutinizes her, with eyes that are almost as light and gray as his suit. Have you always been able to do such things? He asks her, looking back at the watch again. Celia nods. My mama said I was the devil's child, she says quietly. The man in the gray suit leans forward and whispers something in her ear, too low for her father to overhear. A small smile brightens her face. Hold out your right hand, he says, leaning back in his chair. Celia immediately puts out her hand, palms up, unsure of what to expect. But the man in the gray suit does not place anything in her open palm. Instead, he turns her hand over and removes a silver ring from his pinky. He slides it onto her ring finger, though it is too loose for her slim fingers, keeping his other hand around her wrist. She is opening her mouth to state the obvious fact that the though very pretty, does not fit when she realizes that it's shrinking on her hand. Her momentary glee at the adjustment is crushed by the pain that follows as the ring continues to close around her finger, the metal burning into her skin. She tries to pull away, but the man in the gray suit keeps his hand firm around her wrist. The ring thins and fades, leaving only a bright red scar around Celia's finger. The man in the gray suit releases her wrist, and she steps back, retreating into a corner and staring at her hand. "Good girl," her father says. "I will require some time to prepare a player of my own," the man in the gray suit says. "Of course," Hector says. "Take all the time you need." He pulls a gold band from his own hand and puts it on the table, for when you find yours. "You prefer not to do the honors yourself. I trust you." The man in the gray suit nods and pulls a handkerchief from his coat, picking up the ring without touching it and placing it in his pocket. "I do hope you're not doing this because my player won the last challenge." "Of course not," Hector says. "I'm doing this because I have a player that can beat anyone you choose to put against her, and because times have changed enough to make it interesting. Besides, I believe the overall record leans in my favor." The man in the gray suit does not contest this point. He only watches Celia with the same scrutinizing gaze. She attempts to step out of his line of sight, but the room is too small. "I suppose you already have a venue in mind?" he asks. "Not precisely," Hector says. "I thought it might be a bit more fun to leave a bit of leeway as far as venue is concerned. An element of surprise, if you will. I am acquainted with a theatrical producer here in London who should be game for staging the usual. I shall drop a few hints when the time comes, and I'm certain he will come up with something appropriate. Better to have it on neutral ground, though. I thought you might appreciate starting things on your side of the pond." This gentleman's name? Lifier, Chadrish Christophe Lifier. They say he's the illegitimate son of an Indian prince or something like that. Mother was some tramp of a ballerina. I have his card somewhere in this mess. You'll like him. He's quite forward-thinking, wealthy, eccentric, a bit obsessive, but I suppose that is part and parcel of having an artistic temperament. The pile of papers on a nearby desk shift and shuffle until a single business card finds its way to the surface and sails across the room. Hector catches it in his hand and reads it before handing it to the man in the gray suit. He throws wonderful parties. The man in the gray suit puts it in his pocket without so much as glancing at it. "I've not heard of him," he says, "and I'm not too fond of public settings for such matters. I will take it under consideration." "Nonsense. The public setting is half the fun. It brings in so many restrictions, so many challenging parameters to work around." The man in the gray suit considers this for a moment before he nods. "Do we have a disclosure clause? It would be fair given my awareness of your choice of player." "Let's have no clause at all beyond the basic rules of interference and see what happens," Hector says. "I want to push boundaries with this one. No time limits either. I'll even give you first move." "Very well. We have an agreement. I shall be in touch." The man in the gray suit stands, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Miss Celia." Celia bobs another perfect curtsy, all the while regarding him with wary eyes. The man in the gray suit tips his hat to Prospero and slips out the door, and then out of the theater, moving like a shadow onto the busy street. In his dressing room, Hector Bowen chuckles to himself, while his daughter stands quietly in the corner, looking at the scar on her hand. The pain fades as quickly as the ring itself, but the raw red mark remains. Hector takes the silver pocket watch from the table, comparing the time to the clock on the wall. He winds the watch slowly, regarding the hands intently as they swirl around the face. "Celia," he says without looking at her, "why do we wind our watch?" "Because everything requires energy," she recites obediently, eyes still focused on her hand. "We must put effort and energy into anything we wish to change." Very good. He shakes the watch gently and replaces it in his pocket. Why do you call that man Alexander? Celia asks. That's a silly question. It's not his name. Now, how might you know that? Hector asks his daughter, lifting her chin to face him and weighing the look in her dark eyes with his own. Celia stares back at him, unsure of how to explain. She plays over in her mind the impression of the man in the gray suit with his pale eyes and harsh features, trying to figure out why the name does not fit on him properly. It's not a real name, she says. That one that he's carried with him always. This one he wears like a hat, so he can take it off if he wants, like Perspero is for you. You're even more clever than I could have hoped, Hector says, not bothering to refute or confirm her musings about his colleagues' nomenclature. He takes his top hat from the stand and pulls it on her head. Where it slides down, it obscures her questioning eyes in a cage of black silk. Shades of Grey, London, January 1874. The building is as gray as the pavement below and the sky above, appearing as impermanent as the clouds, as though it could vanish into the air without notice. Nondescript gray stones render it indistinguishable from the surrounding buildings, save for a tarnished sign hanging by the door. Even the headmistress inside is clad in a deep charcoal, yet the man in the gray suit looks out of place. The cut of his suit is too sharp, the handles of his cane too well polished beneath his pristine gloves. He gives his name, but the headmistress forgets it almost instantly, and is too embarrassed to ask him to repeat it. Later, when he signs the required paperwork, his signature is completely illegible, and that particular form is lost within weeks of being filed. He presents unusual criteria for what he is looking for. The headmistress is confused, but after a few questions and clarifications, she brings him 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl. The man requests to interview them privately, and the headmistress reluctantly agrees. The first boy is spoken to for only a few minutes before he's dismissed. When he passes the hallway, the other 2 children look to him for some indication of what to expect, but he only shakes his head. The girl is kept longer, but she too is dismissed, her forehead wrinkled in confusion. The other boy is then brought into the room to speak with the man in the gray suit. He's directed to sit in a chair across from a desk, while the man stands nearby. This boy does not fidget as much as the first one did. He sits quietly and patiently, his green eyes taking in every detail of the room, and the man subtly, aware but not outright staring. His dark hair is bluntly cut, as though the barber was distracted during the process, but some attempt had been made to flatten it. His clothes are ragged but well kept, though his pants are too short and may have once been blue or brown or green, but had faded too much to be certain. How long have you been here? The man asks, after silently examining the boy's shabby appearance for a few moments. Always, the boy says. How old are you? I'll be 9 in May. You look younger than that. It's not a lie. I did not mean to suggest that it was. The man in the gray suit stares at the boy without comment for some time. The boy stares back. You can read, I presume? The man asks. The boy nods. I like to read, he says. There aren't enough books here. I've read them all already. Good. Without warning, the man in the gray suit tosses his cane at the boy. The boy catches it in one hand, easily, without flinching, though his eyes narrow in confusion as he looks from the cane to the man and back. The man nods to himself and reclaims his cane, pulling a pale handkerchief from his pocket to wipe the boy's fingerprints from the surface. Very well, the man says. You'll be coming to study with me. I assure you I have a great many books. I'll make the necessary arrangements, and then we shall be on our way. Do I have a choice? Do you wish to remain here? The boy considers this for a moment. No, he says. Very well. Don't you want to know my name? The boy asks. Names are not nearly as much important as people like to suppose, the man in the gray suit says. A label assigned to identify you either by this institution or your departed parents is neither of interest nor value to me. If you find you are in need of a name at any point, you may choose one for yourself. For now, it will not be necessary. The boy is set to pack his small bag of negligible possessions. The man in the gray suit signs papers in response to the headmistress's questions with answers she does not entirely follow, but she does not protest the transaction. When the boy is ready, the man in the gray suit takes him from the gray stone building, and he does not return. Okay, I'm gonna stop here at page 23. I think that I will do one more part of this up to at least page 41, which is where the book sample that you can read up to goes to. I really like this book. It was one of my favorites. I haven't read in a long time, so it's kind of nice to reread it. I really loved the magic and a lot of the descriptions that the author uses. So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed. I know that this is different from my usual thing, but I thought I would give it a go. And yeah, I hope that you have a beautiful night. Stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time, okay? Bye-bye. There's a dog in my lap.